The Templeton Twins by Ellis, Weiner. Please turn to page 47 for chapter 4. When you hear the bell, be sure to go to the top of the next page to continue reading along. Let's begin. Chapter 4. Introducing Casey, the ridiculous dog who is not a Jack Russell. As I am sure you have guessed, the professor said something like, "Oh, all right." In fact, that is exactly what he said. "Oh, all right," he said. "Do you two know where we should get this dog?" John and Abigail had indeed found out exactly where to get the kind of dog they wanted, and in a day or so, their father drove them to a nice lady's house not far from the university, and they obtained the animal that, for reasons that are not entirely known, they named Casey. I will refer to her by that name too, although I also reserve the right to refer to her as the ridiculous dog. The ridiculous dog was a fox terrier of the smooth-haired variety. There is also a kind of fox terrier called a wide-hair, but they look entirely different. A smooth-haired fox terrier is a small to medium-sized dog with a long pointy nose, two perky little triangular ears, and a tail about the length and thickness of a carrot, which fox terriers love to eat. There is perhaps nothing particularly ridiculous in a dog whose appearance is as I have just described. By the way, I suggest you try to say the words, particularly ridiculous, 4 times very quickly without stumbling over them. In fact, I insist on it. It was not Casey's appearance that made her ridiculous. It was her behavior. I don't know if you are familiar with fox terriers. You may think you are, but it is probably that the dog you think is a fox terrier is actually a Jack Russell Terrier. Jack Russells, or Jacks, are perfectly cute and so forth, but their personalities lack the essential ridiculousness of the fox terrier. The fox terrier lives in a constant state of unbelievable and unnecessary excitement. It runs and spins and wags its little tail like a metronome that has lost its mind. When you bring out the leash to take it for a walk and you tell it to sit, it proceeds to leap straight up into the air like a dolphin in a SeaWorld show. Over and 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 over until you finally give up and say, "Oh, for goodness sakes," and you just hold it down and clip on its leash. You may do this 4,000 times over a course of 5 years, and it will never, ever sit. The twins like to walk Casey, the ridiculous dog, around the block. One day, the professor decided to join them, and he decided that he, too, liked to walk her around the block. Now pay attention, please, because an important development is about to follow from this seemingly unimportant fact. As I mentioned, the professor discovered that he enjoyed these walks, And why not? Each street was lined with big, old houses set back from the sidewalk, with porches that looked over gardens and hedges. Huge ancient trees spread their heavy limbs, roofing the yards and streets in a thick canopy of leaves. When the professor and the twins walked the dog around the block, Casey moved in his unusual, ridiculous manner, with her stiff front legs stepping briskly along, and her little head alertly looking this way and that, and her little tail shaking rapidly back and forth, generally acting as though everything in the world was fantastically and electrifying and fantastic. As a result of this, people, and not only friends of the twins or of the professor, but complete strangers, would stop to admire her. "Is this a Jack Russell?" they would always ask. Abigail or John would then say, "No, it's a smooth-haired fox terrier." Then the stranger or the friend and the twins and the professor would fall into a casual, friendly conversation about fox terriers and Jack Russells, about the specific ridiculousness of Casey herself, or even about the weather. Sometimes, if a stranger pointed a finger at the twins and the professor while in friendly conversation, Casey would think it was her job to defend the family, and she would growl. But usually, she simply sat on her back legs in an upright, "I'm being a good posture dog," sometimes adopt, until the conversation was over. After a few pleasant minutes of chat, everyone would go their separate ways. So what, you might be thinking? And that's a good question. So what if people walking a dog stopped to talk to other people? But in this case, one of the people was Professor Elton Templeton, who had not yet recovered from the death of his wife, and who now, almost by accident, found himself talking to people and getting fresh air and enjoying the kind of pleasant, light exercise you can enjoy when walking a ridiculous dog. This went on for about 2 weeks, until one morning, while the twins were bustling about getting ready to go to school, they were stunned to see their father come into the kitchen in a sparkly new, billowy white shirt and a crisp, if baggy, white pants. "I'll be in my office until 4, children," he said. "Don't worry about dinner. I'll bring something back." Abigail asked, "You'll be in your office?" "The office at the university?" John added. The professor replied quite casually, as though it were the most naturalist thing in the world. "Why, yes, I'm going back to work." The twins were delighted to hear this. They would have leaped up and cried, "Yay!" and "All right!" and given each other high fives, and then grinningly descended on their father for a triumphant 3-way hug, except for the fact that such things only happen on television and in movies. Instead, Abigail said, "That's superb, Papa." And John said, "Wow, okay." And the professor smiled a shy little smile, picked up his briefcase, and left. Isn't that wonderful? Hint, yes it is. Thanks to the ordinary, everyday act of walking a dog, the professor found a way to get out of his workshop, out of his study, out of the house, really out of himself, and back into the world. This did not mean that he no longer missed his wife. It meant that he could miss his wife, but still get on with the rest of his life. Or so he thought. That very afternoon, the twins returned home from school and puttered around the kitchen, making some silly after-school snack, such as cream cheese on apples, or celery stuffed with graham crackers, or whatever it is that children seem to like. Suddenly, as to their surprise, a figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. Casey barked at the intruder until John told her to be quiet, because it was no intruder. It was their father. He was holding a large pizza box, and he looked tired and unhappy. "You're home early, Papa," Abigail said. "Is something wrong?" "Children," he said, that is to say, I think, we're going to have to move." The twins were shocked. "You mean to a new house?" John asked. "Yes, yes, dear, a new house," the professor said. "But not just that. To a new university and a new town, a new everything. I have accepted a post at the Tickeridge Baltock Institute of Technology." "Tick-tock tech?" Abigail asked. "Why?" It was typical of Abigail to have heard and remembered the nickname of the Tickeridge Baltock Institute of Technology, wasn't it? Just say yes, it was, because it was. "They are providing me with resources for completing my work on my personal one-man helicopter," the professor said. "Tickeridge Baltock will provide me with a laboratory and money and so forth." "But doesn't the university give you those things too?" Abigail asked. "Why do we have to move?" At this, the professor looked uncomfortable and unhappy. He said, "Because we do." And that was that. He handed the pizza box to John and went into his study. Questions for review. Number 1. Mary had 5 oranges. He gave 2 to Tom. Tom then buys twice as many as Mary had left and gives half of them to her. Who cares? Number 2. Why are some dogs ridiculous, whereas other dogs are utterly ridiculous? Number 3. Have you ever walked around the block? Would you like to do so now? Well, the rest of us will wait here until you return. Or will we? That is the end of Chapter 4.